yeah, so in the half hour or so that we have together, just sharing an overview of some of the work, sharing a few of the audio pieces, both have one from a camper and then one from, it's actually published on a website. So I will actually remove it from the recording just to honor that it was part of that journal publication, Jeff, the voices that we have from the hospital. And then to share a little bit about, and Jeff, if we can catch you before you jump off, just to share a little bit about what your research revealed about the benefits of storytelling. I have one of our slides, but I think there's a real opportunity. I mean, I think we think about camp and storytelling is just, it's part of the culture, and it's what camp, what's more iconic than telling stories around a campfire. And it's about, so often it's about the joy of that. As you peel back all the layers of what benefits and kind of the instincts, the human instinct to share and connect through storytelling, when you peel back the layers of that, the benefits, the psychological benefits, the therapeutic benefits, and that just absolutely aligned with what Chris Culgren was talking about earlier. So yeah, with that, I guess I will jump into it.
Okay.
So the background of my getting involved with camp was I had begun my career as a journalist, and then my first love was fiction. And so at the time I was writing fiction, and I had a day job at a digital agency, and because in my life as a journalist, it was very much my motivation was kind of a journalist in pursuit of community service. I missed that community element when most of my creative work was kind of in isolation and solitude, working on fiction, really. And the day job was my livelihood, but I kind of had these silos. So in an effort to reconnect with community, I started bringing my creative teaching to kids. And I really wanted to work with kids that had medical challenges for two reasons. I had lost a friend recently to cancer, and I was with her at the end of her life. And while we actually didn't do, she had a 6-month-old child, and her end of her life was very difficult. And really all I did was I would read to her, and I was just present with her. And it wasn't, that I was kind of there to help her. Sometimes I've had friends who help people who are at the end of their lives kind of find expression for what they want to say, but that wasn't my friend's experience. I was just present with her. But because I felt there was nothing more meaningful to me than to help be with someone at that time in their life, that I wanted to be in a community that was kind of just facing the challenges of illness, because it brings, I'm in the community now, but it brings an honesty and a vulnerability that's the kind of community I want to spend my time with. And I'd been doing it in the community, a nonprofit called 826 Michigan. It's a wonderful organization, but we were having a hard time with outreach and getting kids to come into the space where we did the workshops. And I was working with a nurse at the time, and the nurse knew Doug. This was back in 2005, 2006 maybe. And Doug asked if I would bring the storytelling workshop to Camp Mishitanki, which was at the time up in Oscoda, Michigan, where it was a 3-hour trip. And I was like, absolutely, volunteer for a week, go up, and have no idea what's going to happen when we go up there. No idea. But I did know I was going to go from teaching and facilitating a workshop of 3 to 4 kids to 80 to 90 kids, and so what an opportunity that was. And when we went up there the first year, I had been doing audio recordings with the kids in the community, but really didn't know if it was going to take off. And we had a whole week to fill. And I kind of fell back on what I knew, which was, I called it writing. It was called the Writing Studio. And the first day the kids showed up and they saw the word writing, and they were like, this is camp. Like, we're not going to write. Like, that's schoolwork. And that night we had a banner outside, and I think my friend and I, Catherine Calabro, who's fabulous, I think we like took the banner down and we changed it from writing lab. And Catherine's credit actually was Catherine who came up with Story Studio. We emphasized story, and we moved from having the kids do anything on paper, really. I mean, to make that the focus was not to write on paper. And in fact, we learned, because a lot of the kids are taking medications, can make their hands shaky. Writing can be hard. They've been out of school. And so even the idea of spelling and grammar, and creates this obstacle. So remove that and make it all about going back to the campfire. We're around a campfire. We're just going to tell stories. And all we did was provide just the lightest kind of different imaginative prompts. And that first year, it was just an amazing experience to see these beautiful stories tumble out of, honestly, in a very different way from the way I had worked with kids that didn't have such, I would say, serious illnesses. And I think part of it, there's probably so many reasons why, but I believe that one of them was just giving them the space and giving them the permission to do it. And because they hadn't had the opportunity, because of all the limitations in their life, suddenly it's like, just one of the many activities at camp where suddenly they have an opportunity that they haven't had. And rather than just, like this little leap, there's this massive leap. I mean, it's just like this huge expression of their imagination and their story. So anyway, we did a lot of the workshops. We did them on picnic tables outside, and we have since, that is really what has led me to North Star Reach, and have continued to run the storytelling program. We call it Story Studio, and we now have a dedicated space at camp. And I think I have a slide I can show some of you. Let's see if I can pull it up without too much trouble. Let's see. I don't have the slide queued up, and I hate to spend too much time kind of in my browser, but we have a dedicated space, and it's this beautiful room, and it's a large, almost it has very high walls, and it has carpeting. And to create kind of an intimate space for the storytelling, we put these tents in it so that it creates so much about the facilitation that I've learned. And this will relate to the hospital experiences. How do you out of the gate create what to the people, the kids coming in, feels like a safe space to share? And in the very early session this morning, we had one of our volunteers, Mike Bazio, speaking about how everyone who comes into this community, the first couple of days that volunteers are being trained, so much of it is about making sure that the kids feel safe. Like, what can we do in every way we're expressing ourselves and being present to make them know that this is a safe space. So to transition to the hospital, because I'd like to get there while we still have you, Jeff, because the hospital is also going to connect to the research that Jeff did. So the hospital program started because the recording experience with the kids, and this was pre-podcast explosion. This was 2009, 2010. I wanted to work with adult patients, partly because of the experience of being with my friend, and just saw it as a great opportunity to help people who were in a place in their lives where they might have something really important to share, and to use the technology to make that accessible to people in the hospital who, if they have a disability, or if they're on medications, or if they've, had a stroke or something. It's a way that they can express themselves that if we were running a writing program, it would be difficult. And so they have a program at University of Michigan Hospital that was started by Elaine Sims. It's been going, it's really a model of excellence in arts and healthcare. It was started, I think Elaine, she's been there 30 years, the program. It's one of the oldest programs in the country, and they have artists, musicians, and visual artists, and they service patients at no cost. at the adult patients. So they actually don't go to Mott because Mott has a child life specialist and they have different training to work with kids. So this is very adult focused. And Elaine had been working with Jeff prior to me approaching them. They had been kind of exploring some work with doing writing in smaller groups at the hospital, but I basically approached them and said, why don't we give this a try, bringing the audio recording technology into the hospital space? And they were willing to train me and Jeff provided the clinical oversight. And the way the program works is I get referrals from clinicians like Jeff, the clerks, the hosts on the floor, the nurses. So right away, the patients or the people that I'm meeting with, they're not in too much pain. We know that they might be sharing a lot of stories with the nurses. And so it's sort of a self-selecting group right out of the gate. And then when I show up, I actually approach with, we have worked very hard to keep it a very open kind of model system. So really there's not much of a script. But the most important thing is in an opening question after I introduce myself and to say that I'm with Gifts of Art and, this is a program at no charge. And I have a audio recorder and can help facilitate capturing an audio story if they like. And then the question I ask is there someone in your life you'd like to give a story to? And we actually didn't realize the first couple of weeks the program started to frame it that way. And before I framed it that way, I was actually saying things like, would you like to work with me to maybe create a story, or we could write it, or you could do a poem, or it wasn't very tight. And it certainly didn't contain the words gift and someone in your life. And that phrasing just came out pretty spontaneously one night. But the minute we framed it that way, I was meeting with someone once a week, almost, we went from not getting anybody to right now, I would say is about 1 out of 4 that will say, yes, that I would love to do that. And then again, the people that choose to accept are also kind of self-selecting because I think they really are responding to that, what I would say is a pretty charged word, which is gift. And I do believe that any creative activity sort of comes out of a spirit of generosity and out of a kind of a desire to connect. And that goes back to something Chris Culgren was saying earlier about, one of the things you can do, going back to the idea of resilience is how do we find ways to connect, ask friends for help, connect with support groups. But storytelling is just innately a way that we're connecting with others. And so what I was going to do is share one of the audio pieces. The stories that patients share are confidential, and we let them know that out of the gate that this is an activity just for them. And then we ask if they feel comfortable, and particularly when we were doing the research, if after they record the piece, would they be interested in allowing us to share it for educational purposes? And also, would they be willing to be part of a research project? So I'm going to share the I Knew It Was You piece, Jeff. And what you'll hear is, and this is true, I've probably recorded, I don't know, 140, 100 pieces over the last, it's been about, what, seven years. It's one night a week, but I've had last 4 years, I've had some challenging caregiving responsibilities for my mom, actually, and wasn't always able to come every week. But pretty much without exception, the stories that are recorded are like the stories that happened at camp that first time, which is they come out spontaneously with an expressive emotion that's just remarkable. And I think a lot of it has to do with kind of where the desire to connect, you're separated from someone you love. The things that Chris talked about was that question, that framing question of, is there someone in your life you'd like to give a story to? What is contained in that question is what any storyteller is thinking about as one of their first questions, which is, who's your audience? And that audience is in their answer. Who would I like to give a story to? I miss my 8-year-old granddaughter. That's your audience. Now, as a facilitator, what I do is I'll ask questions from the point of view of an 8-year-old granddaughter. I don't ask as a clinician. I don't ask as, I'm inhabiting what they've given me. So I'm always drawing from the inventory of what they've given me. It's the same thing we do with kids at camp. I mean, that's one of the great pleasures, imaginative pleasures of the work, is you get to be the ghost, you get to be the fairies. So by locating myself and asking questions, I'm kind of allowing them to be experienced and kind of heard and seen in a way that they're not used to feeling when they're in a clinical setting. It's all about their illness. Now they're allowing me, and through the process of story, to connect to something really intimate. So the audience, so you're going to hear a piece right out of the gate. He knew he wanted to do a piece for his wife. We have an audience. One of the things I also do, because of my background and thinking about how you shape stories or structure stories, is might be like, well, where do I go next? And you just follow the emotion, and it's often, because it goes back to the idea of a gift, it's often like, what are you thankful for? I might say, is there a time where your wife, a recent time where you'd like to say thank you, or where you really exemplifies kind of how she took care of you? And what I try to do is help them locate it in a scene, kind of, as I often say, it's like as if it were like we're looking at a photograph. Can you describe the photograph? Again, that goes back to what Chris was saying, is if you can almost get out of your head a little bit, all of the worry, you're thinking about the sensory details. Remember, she said, touch your sleeve, right? Hold a piece of ice, because it locates you in your senses. And that's what you do in a good story. It's all about, this is also something Mike said at the very beginning with the training of the volunteers. You start slowly and you build trust. And as you and starting slowly is, am I hot? Am I hot? Am I hot? What is hot for me? Hot is like, I am so hot, it's like a cup of hot coffee, For me, it might be hot coffee. For Jessica, it might be, what would it be, Jessica? It might be like some
warm apple cider.
There you go. But whatever you associate to, it's uniquely for you. So, and it's also sensory. So it's getting the person kind of, so to go back to the story you're going to hear, those moments, and it's really just 3 moments. And I'll often say, like, there's your beginning, middle, and end. There's your first act, second act, third act. Because if I can just lightly use the language of narrative, it's allowing them to be the composer, to be the arranger. Like it gives them confidence in the way we're going, the direction we're going, and confidence in themselves. And very quickly, what I try to do is not have them, this is true for the kids at camp too, because we don't have a lot of time with the kids at camp, is to get them to not me the story. The story is for the 8-year-old granddaughter. So I'm trying to give them enough confidence to get going, but not exhaust the storytelling on me, save it for the recording. And with just the lightest little facilitation like that, and then the recorder, of course, it means so much, because it's not me, I disappear at that. We disappear for the kids at camp. The recorder becomes the world. The recorder becomes their best friends. And that's actually a great pleasure, to almost disappear. And once the recorders comes on, these stories it is such a tribute to, I believe, kind of our human abilities to just create stories. So you're going to hear a piece, came out exactly like you heard it. And before the recorder was turned on, this person knew who he wanted to give the story to. We had a really rough outline of what he might say, but he gave himself over fully the moment the recorder was turned on, and this came out fully formed. The other thing, and it goes back to giving people choices. So choices, do you want to do a beginning, middle, and end story? Do you want to do a poem? Like, that's all their choice. They also get the choice of, do they want to put a little music behind it? And they get to choose the music. So what you'll hear is the music that he chose. And then we'll come back and I'll just say a few more things about the facilitation part of it. And if Jeff, I know you've got your class, but if you had just 5 minutes, we could chat a little bit about the research part of it. So, all right, let me see if I can get this teed up here. It doesn't matter how many times I hear that story, it just, yeah. And when we were done, I hold the recorder, and this was sort of by instinct, but I actually hold the recorder very close so that we get a good sound quality. But the fact that I do that, it's almost like this offering, you know, it's right there. And I was holding it. And when he stopped, he looked at the recorder, like we were both looking at the recorder, like his feeling was like, where did that come from? You know, he was just, and it happens again and again and again. It's just such a tribute to kind of our abilities as storytellers, and also kind of those of us who are willing to be open to our vulnerabilities and have that desire to connect out of a place of generosity. So what I thought, you guys can hear me okay? Yeah, okay. What I thought I would do, Jeff, is just, I've got the clip. So Jeff, a year after the project started, did an Irb Research Project where he looked at kind of the benefits to the people doing the stories. And I can share a little bit about that. And Jeff, I know you have to go, but I thought I could just play the clip of the man that you just heard. You're going to hear him say how he felt afterwards. And there's so much resonance with what, I mean, Jeff, and in a paper that we wrote, and actually Jeff has another paper coming out about his process, the research process, but really looks at many elements of that. But having heard Chris this morning, it's like so much resonance with everything she was saying about resilience. And so anyway, I'll play that clip, and then we can chat a little bit about the research part of it. And I feel like that ability to like, he was looking to connect. A part of him was looking to connect, and he took the risk. And as he said, I didn't know I could put my thoughts back together like that. How we you know, we often talk about like reaching beyond our potential and our possibilities. Like, how do we reach our full potential? And it's like, sometimes you give yourself over to kind of these new opportunities, and that it allowed him to reset, and it settled him. It you know, for I think a lot of the reasons that Chris was talking about. I'll do one more screen share because it kind of highlights, there were three I don't know if you want to call them findings, Jeff, but you know, in the research, in the paper that we wrote, and the research that Jeff did, kind of the three key findings were, can you guys see this slide? So about personal empowerment. So when you're ill, I mean, this again relates to whether you're a caregiver or your child is ill, or when you're facing limitations and you have an opportunity to do, you're reminded, oh, I I do have the ability to express myself, or I do have the ability to, you know, what I think you feel obviously disempowered. So you're looking for activities that can remind you that, and make you feel empowered. And that was huge for these patients, that they, and I think a big thing for them was that they were so used to being not able to do anything, especially for the caregivers who they want to thank. And now so many of the stories, you know, they're open to do whatever they want, but so many of them do stories of gratitude and thank you, because it's an opportunity for them to give a real gift. And then the second big finding was that it allows them to feel connected to others. And I think with storytelling or any kind of expressive activity, personal expressive activity, I would say it's a connection to a part of yourself that maybe you haven't connected to in a while. It's a connection to others, and it can also be a connection just to the wider world. It helps you discover, you know, Jessica and I were doing some story studio hospital outreach videos this summer, and we were really kind of realizing that a part of what we're offering kids at camp is to connect to the wonder of the natural world, that kind of connection, and stories allow you to do that. And then finally, just a deeper life perspective. It kind of, again, gets you kind of what Chris was saying, like it gets you a little bit out of feeling alone. And so like, it's just you, and you feel this expansiveness. And so there's a real benefit in kind of how you see in that moment, how you might see kind of your life perspective. Jeff, can I ask you, just because I know you've got a class, but is there anything you'd like to share? If you don't mind, I might like to tee up one story. So Jeff worked in the on the rehabilitation, people who were in the rehabilitation, unit is that?
Mm-hmm.
And
that's physical rehabilitation from injuries.
Yeah.
People hear rehab, but they think of drug rehab right away or something else. But
yeah.
Yeah.
But your story about how you saw the way people responded to having, and really these sessions they're an hour and a half, 2 hours. Like I think of them as being very brief, and it's just a one time. It's just a one. We create and do the recording, and they're left with the story on a flash drive or a CD. But that brief hour and a half, 2 hours reminded you of what people that were on the rehab floor, physical rehab floor, would get when they went home on a day pass, because of the way it reconnected them with a sense of home and who their identity outside of the hospital. Could you talk just a little bit about that?
Yes, this is really what I wanted to do for years, was to somehow bring into the hospital what I found from people who were able to go out and take a day pass. Some people weren't able to do that, and as time went on, insurance companies wouldn't allow us to give people day passes, and with the words that, well, if they can go home for the weekend, they can go home from the hospital. Well, that's not true. Increasingly, I wanted to be able to have some kind of experience of reconnecting with who they are without leaving the hospital. And people who used to go home would go home and just be so relieved that they were able to see their stuff, able to see the projects that they had left behind that they were going to go back to, not to mention able to see the people and their pets and all the things that are important to them. So telling a story, especially to the kind of attentive and kind listener that we have in Amy, right? She was just so able to help people come out. to help people feel safe, as you were saying, but just very willing and able to dive deep into their feelings and talk about um, and create a story that ultimately many of these patient subjects were very proud of. Proud that they were able to do this and that they were able to give it to somebody who mattered to them, and then in some cases actually help them to rethink what they would like their life to be like after they leave the hospital, or now that they have this new disability or better understanding of their illness. All right, what am I going to do with that? How am I going to adapt? How am I going to help my kids adapt? Help my spouse adapt? And it was a time there's something about telling the story that helped put it in perspective, put their situation in perspective, and bring it back to who they are as in their life as a person. So that was, I was really pleased to see that it worked, basically. And it didn't work for everybody and worked for different people in different ways, but we found out after people worked with Amy, we would have a session of those who agreed to participate in the research would be interviewed either by me or one of our assistants a day later or a couple of days later. And then 2 weeks later, often by telephone. And then all of this was recorded. And so we were able to go over the tapes and the transcripts to see just what categories of meaning, what kinds of meanings we could draw out that we could say, well, this had something to do with connection for this person, or this had something to do with a deeper life perspective. And that's how those became the data for the research project. Well, that's the nutshell.
Yeah.
In a nutshell. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm so just, Jeff has a lot going on right now with his teaching. And I saw that he had signed on a couple hours before our session, and I was just so thrilled that you were able to join us because you've been such an important part of the project.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
I always love talking about this project.
Yeah. And I love that it was the children who brought this to us. Really, they taught us, mm-hmm. And I think that there's a real opportunity for us at camp even to maybe kind of think about story, and maybe even because sort of using it in a way, because it's just such a part of the culture, and we're all just telling stories, but to think maybe more intentionally about the benefits to the families and the kids that come to camp, and how we can even shape some of our activities to kind of stretch kind of the feelings of connection or the benefits that people get, while at the same time it being a completely natural and organic and spontaneous thing. So they kind of, the two projects are constantly informing each other, and but it's really the children that have taught us and will continue to teach us both how to play, how to be open to our imaginations. I mean, part of the reset or the calming down is, I think you tap into this resilient part of you. I mean, the imaginative spirit is very resilient. So yeah. So you've used up this time. I've filled the space. I have not allowed any time for questions. We did just get the 5-minute warning. Do people have questions? And you're more than welcome to. I mean, Charlotte, I know I'm going to see you, which is lovely. But is it Fabian? Am I pronouncing that right? Yeah. And Lauren, I mean, I know we'll be in touch, but if you have any questions, are there any before we get bumped off? I mean, we haven't gotten our 60-second warning yet about anything we've shared.
If I could ask a question real quick, either
Yeah.
you or Jeff answer this. I was sitting here the whole time you were sharing, thinking about our hospital experience. So based upon what you were sharing, like trying to capture or even help tying into what Dr. Chris said, some of what's going on, like trying to tell the experience, but think about who you want to share the story with. So like, for instance, like if I would think about sharing the times, like all the times my husband has not been able to be with me because he's working. So then I would then tell the story as if I was talking to him. Okay.
Yeah. You know, this sort of touches on a much bigger topic, which is when you are going through, to use, you know, the theme of the keynote, when you're going through trauma, right? I think it can be very hard when the trauma is raw to actually put that kind of more imaginative storytelling. I think that can be hard to access. Like it's almost like going back to this idea that you start lightly and then you see what you feel comfortable. So with your husband, it might be starting with something. It might be a little different, but it might be a moment of if you were to describe, all that's to say is because I know how much time you've been spending in the hospital, and I know what a difficult stretch this has been, that if you are documenting kind of almost like Madison's medical journey, I think that's going to be different than a more imaginative kind of story. So let's just say it was his birthday. I could see that being you may be sharing what if there was something that Madison wanted to share about his birth. Like, do you remember when Madison sang you happy birthday 2 years ago? And you would describe that scene. And you remember the card she made you when she was 2, and you would describe that. And so it's a slightly different, but that whole idea of like where I've heard people say this on the moth storytelling, that you try to tell a story like not inside the wound, but you just to the side of it. Because if you're inside of it, it's almost like then you would need a real therapist. I mean, like sometimes it can be so raw. So it's like when you're accessing a more imaginative or even like I'm not saying it has to be fiction, but it kind of takes you a little bit to the side of the trauma, if that makes sense.
You know, Amy, it strikes me that maybe that's why the majority of our subjects didn't talk about why they were in the hospital. You know,
Yeah.
They didn't talk about their illness, their injury, but they themselves just chose to talk about something to the side. Yeah.
And if I think if we had gone in, they often say, I often relate a lot to like the way I think about fiction and poetry, but that when you write a piece of fiction, one of the metaphors is that if you were bowling, you don't try to hit the front pin because you're going to get a split. The best way is to hit the side pin, right? And then you get more energy from that if you kind of hit the side. So